Everyone, Kate here with a late review of Romola by George Eliot. So for those of you who participated in the January Readalong Most Victorian, I will be discussing Romola by George Eliot. And the reason for the lateness is that honestly, I was really intimidated summarizing my thoughts on this amazing, all-encompassing, deep character study of a book. This was George Eliot's favorite of her books, and I kind of went in thinking that if it was her favorite of her books, it was going to be pretty deep and philosophical, even maybe more so than Daniel Deronda and Middlemarch and Adam Bede. And this to me is definitely the deepest and most philosophical out of her books, but it's going to stay with me so well. And just the depths that she goes to, kind of pushing the general themes of this book and the up close and personal ways in which you get to know the different characters really puts things into just such a unique light. So this is taking place in the last decade of the 1400s. A lot of the action is happening in 1492, which I think is interesting when you're reading historical fiction and you know other significant events that are happening in the world at that time. And so we know the rhyme, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So kind of to know about different things that are happening around the world and how there will be such huge ramifications from Columbus coming to the Americas, and just how that will change the world, while the world is also really being changed during the Renaissance, during this time of rediscovery with art and literature and culture in general. So I did really enjoy. I didn't watch the complete documentary that I had posted about. I did like a community post saying I was going to be watching a documentary on the Medicis. But the bits that I did watch of it, I found so interesting. They were saying that, you know, in the Victorian era, London was the place to be. But during the Renaissance, that Florence, Italy was the place to be. And I do really feel that you get such a sense of place while you're reading this. And I kept looking up all of the different places that were mentioned. And it is also neat to think about in other books, maybe characters that visit Florence, Italy. And I do know in A Room with a View, Florence, Italy is one of the places that she goes to. You hear a lot about Santa Croce, the church, and it was such a beautiful, beautiful church. So look up pictures of it if you have not, and there are some really significant events that happen in this. This is a deeply religious novel, and I was really surprised once I heard that critics in the day and age that this came out all called it her best novel, including Henry James being one of them, and it being her favorite novel, yet Middlemarch is the one that we hear emphasized so much, and I don't know what it is. I don't know if maybe this, to the modern and often a-religious audience, doesn't hold up as well as Middlemarch does. Maybe Middlemarch has more universal themes for people, but I really felt impacted by this book, and I'm not sure. But maybe because it is a Victorian novel, then looking back to the Renaissance, it feels somewhat less accessible. I still stand by that I think Adam Bede is her most accessible book. But I really, really loved this. And it's, you know, she's now a favorite author. And so even though I think maybe I still like Adam Bede, Daniel Deronda, and Middlemarch even more than this, that's still, when you're talking about a favorite author, you know, saying this is my fourth favorite, that's still really high praise. You know, I was just so taken in by this book, and it really did feel like a labor of love to read it, where the reading did not come easily, but the reward that I was getting made it really worth it. You know, with a book, with a classic that I decide to DNF, I have this real laborious reading experience, but I'm not getting any reward out of it. Whereas with this, I instantly felt like I was in Florence at the time, and I instantly feel I'm getting this really vivid and up-close picture of these characters. And it's just so beautifully written because it's George Eliot, and she just has such a skill and such a poignant style of pointing out these flaws and these strengths in different characters. So our main character is the title character of Romola, which after reading, you find out that Romola is blonde. And so it's a shame that I think maybe just publishers hear Italian and just think of Italians as all being, dark haired, but she is blonde. So I wish there was a different painting that was put up at the front, but it is a beautiful cover, but it's not Romola. And so since the title is Romola, I think it should look like Romola. But you're following Romola at a very significant time in her life when her father is getting older and he is still working on his life's work. So actually, I was really reminded of Casaubon from Middlemarch. I found that interesting. It seems a little bit like George Eliot kind of recycled the character and then did a bit more with him, whereas Romola's father is not quite at the forefront as much as Tito and Romola are, whereas Casaubon, I feel like, is a real forefront character in Middlemarch. These two men giving their lives to study and trying to make future generations who are studying the things that they are, classic literature, to make it more accessible for them, to put together collections of it, and just this great work that they're doing. But I feel that we don't get to know him quite as much as you do Casaubon from Middlemarch. So I just found that an interesting kind of character use. Oh yeah, we also see this character. But anyhow, enough about that parallel. And at the time, there is a shipwreck, and Tito is one of the people who has crashed in this shipwreck. And very soon into this book, you see that Tito is duplicitous, and he has not told the truth right on. So you kind of know going in right away that things are not going to be great when Tito's around. Things are not going to go so well. And you just get this sense, you kind of get the creeps right away knowing him, oh wow, he's lying just within, the first or second chapter that we see him, because he is given a note from the man who has basically raised him like a son, saying to please let him go get him out of prison. And he has money that he had with him, or he has jewels, and he could go rescue him. And he totally is like, you know what? I'm going to opt out of doing that. I don't really care. I don't want to spend the time on doing that. I want to use these jewels for my own gain. And it just, you know right away what he's going to be like. I was messaging with Christy Luis in Instagram, and she used the Pinocchio emoji for him, and I just thought it was so appropriate because he's such a liar. And the one thing, as I was reading this, I was like, my goodness, I wish I had studied this book in college, because there is so much depth in this. Not only is it a really captivating plot, but all of the arts and culture that's happening at the time, and such a deep understanding you can tell that George Eliot has of it. It seems like it's kind of this minor hobby of hers, is studying the Renaissance, and the deep knowledge of the city of Florence that she visited from this. And I think probably just took immediate inspiration to write Romola. And in addition to that, all of the church history that's in there, the deep character studies, and how all of the art and culture is interweaving with the lives of these characters, and how it's all having this ripple effect. The politics at the time with the Medicis being thrown in and out of power. There's so much to this that I feel I could read this 10 times and finally feel like I really have my footing in this book. It's such a special book. So I'm sorry, this review is going to be a bit rambly just because there's so much to cover with this book. And so Tito very soon becomes torn between two women. Tessa, who is this sweet, very childlike, naive, beautiful young woman. And she is just so alluring to him because she just takes him as he is. She doesn't ask any questions. Whereas Romola, I feel, is this woman who is so far from a doormat and so not to be toyed with, and just such a contrast to Tessa. So it seems like he can just feel so much more at ease and feel comfortable with Tessa, whereas he's kind of putting on this facade a lot more when he is with Romola, and really kind of weaseling his way into the trust of her father. And we see coming together of them and the breakdown of their marriage, some really heartbreaking moments, some moments that I was just brought to tears. And honestly, since Tito came into the story, since it is going to be that Romola becomes entangled with Tito and that Tito becomes entangled with Tessa, it actually had kind of, if I could have picked an ideal ending, I kind of got the ending that I wanted. So I'll be really curious for other readers out there what they thought of the ending, because this kind of, it was almost like this sort of girl power ending where I know I shouldn't look at it through rose-colored glasses. Being a single woman in this time was not an easy thing. It was so hard. There was so much stigma around it. And so I don't want to look at it through rose-colored glasses, but I was just so happy for these women to be rid of this dreadful, dreadful man. I felt this sense of relief. But I will backtrack now that I've kind of talked a bit about the plot. And I definitely, like I said, did struggle with this book at points, particularly when they were having philosophical discussions, just because I felt I was so out of my depth. And so I kind of sped read through those passages, and then the passages that meant more to me, I really savored those. So like I said, I really feel like I should read this like 10 times, and then I'll get more of my feet on the ground with it. That's why classics are just so worth rereading. So I have marked, I don't know, maybe 8 different quotes in here that really kind of hit home some points that I wanted to make about this. And then Christy Luis from Dostoevsky in Space, who I said earlier that we had messaged about this book, she left just the most wonderful comment with such great insights, which I'm not surprised at all. She's such an insightful person. And so I will link her channel down below in case you're not subscribed, and I will read her comment because she made me think about some aspects of this book that I wouldn't have. So hers was the only comment that I got. So if you are planning on reading, I just forgot the name, Hester, then please, leave comments. It makes the video that I can put up have a lot more interesting things to say in it. Okay, so I did underline and annotate so much, but I did try to stick to, for this video, the ones that I'm including being those quotes that really, to me, kind of go with the general themes of the novel and really take them home. So one of the things, I'll read part of Christy's comment, and one of the things that she says is, part of what I loved about this was the theme that bad choices build bad habits, which build bad character, and vice versa. It's hard to portray those arcs in fiction. It has to be a very ambitious project, which Romola most certainly is. And I loved the way that Christy put that bad choices build bad habits, which build bad character. And that is things that I think is a fairly Victorian theme. And I definitely, I think, want to go eventually and watch the rest of that Medici documentary to kind of see what were like the moral themes that people would have accepted of the day, like it told in the fables or fairy tales. I feel, though, that maybe that is kind of an age-old theme. Bad choices build bad habits, which build bad character. And one of the quotes that when Christy said that, and then I was looking through quotes to read, really struck me. This is in chapter 9. I think it's volume 1, chapter 9. And it's under every guilty, the name of the chapter is A Man's Ransom. So under every guilty secret, there is hidden a brood of guilty wishes, whose unwholesome, infecting life is cherished by the darkness. The contaminating effect of deeds often lies less in the commission than in the consequent adjustment of our desires. The enlistment of our self-interest on the side of falsity, as on the other hand, the purifying influence of public confession springs from the fact that by it the hope in lies is forever swept away, and the soul recovers the noble attitude of simplicity. And there's even a Bible verse that says, out of the heart the mouth speaks. And so these things that you can bury deep can really fester, and eventually they will come out. And you can think you have everything covered. And, we see this with public scandals that come out, these things that you think aren't really a big deal, these different things that you thought before you wouldn't compromise on, and then you start to compromise on them. And eventually the truth will out. And then another quote about Tito that says, he had sold himself to evil, but at present life seemed so nearly the same to him that he was not conscious of the bond. He meant all things to go on as they had done before, both within and without him. He meant to win golden opinions by meritorious exertion, by ingenious learning, by amiable compliance. He was not going to do anything that would throw him out of harmony with the beings he cared for. And you see in Tito the whole time, he is so good at rationalizing his behavior and justifying his actions and saying ends justify means. He is so delusional about himself and his actions. Then what's interesting is you see this kind of this theme that carries throughout the book also of the location being stifling their true character. And Tito continually in the book thinks that if he just leaves Florence that he can change. But, you know, we know when you leave somewhere and you go somewhere else, you take yourself with you. And this thing that he says to Romola, I should like to see you under the southern sun, lying among the flowers, subdued into mere enjoyment, while I bent over you and touched the lute and sang to you some little unconscious strain that seemed all one with the light and the warmth. You had never known the happiness of the nymphs, my Romola. But then ironically, you know, Tito thinks just leaving that he can totally change himself. And the two instances that Romola does leave Florence, one, she tries to leave Florence and she has this revelation, no, I need to go back. There's still purpose for me there. And the second time when she does successfully leave and has this own sort of renaissance for herself and this newfound faith in doing good for others, I guess, is how I would put it. That, you know, Romola is a deeply religious character. And so this sort of crisis of faith when she leaves Florence for the second time. Crisis of faith, honestly, I think both times, but maybe a more deep, despairing crisis the second time. And things are really changed. So Tito, he's not this growing, evolving character. He is devolving and just going more and more into the depths of his deceit. Whereas Romola, both times, things are changed and there are ripple effects for the good, I would say, overall. Then I find it so interesting. There is a real sense of the serious consequences of actions. And Romola just has this kind of foreboding after meeting with her brother. I didn't really address that in the synopsis, but her brother is away for a time. And then when she does see him on his deathbed, he tells her, I have this vision about you marrying and bad things will happen if you do, you know, don't do it. And then she kind of decides eventually that he was probably just kind of hallucinating almost in the hysteria that he was going through. And right after their wedding at Santa Croce, Tito and Romola's wedding, it says, and as he spoke, there came slowly into view at the height far above the heads of the onlookers, a huge and ghastly image of winged time, with his scythe and hourglass, surrounded by his winged children, the hours. He was mounted on a high car, completely covered with black, and the bullocks that drew the car were also covered with black, their horns alone standing out white above the gloom, so that in the somber shadow of the houses it seemed to those at a distance as if Time and his children were apparitions floating through the air, and behind them came what looked like a troop of the sheeted dead gliding above blackness. And as they glided slowly, they chanted in a wailing strain. A cold horror seized Romola, for at the first moment it seemed as if her brother's vision, which could never be effaced from her mind, was being half fulfilled. She clung to Tito, who, divining what was in her thoughts, said, "What dismal fooling sometimes pleases you, your Florentines? Doubtless this is an invention of Piero di Cosimo, who loves such grim merriment." And so he just writes it off immediately. Oh, it's nothing. You're being silly. You're being hysterical. You know, the term that people love to use for women. An interesting little trivia that I did find out. The bell tower in Santa Croce was struck by lightning in 1512 and was not replaced until 1847. And it was going to be, obviously, it's going to look different. So I find it interesting, the bell tower that is featured in this, and Santa Croce is a big feature in this book. Lots of important events happen there. It's a different bell tower, and she saw a different one than we would have seen, and it was without a bell tower for over 300 years. Then I find just this little snippet that was really interesting and profound. She says, the contradiction between men's lives and their professed beliefs had pressed upon him with a force that had been enough to destroy his appetite for the world. So another big part of this plot is the reformer Savonarola. And I was, thinking about the dates. So this is 1492 when we're seeing this. And the 95 Theses would have been nailed on the door in 1517. And so kind of all of this underlying tension starts to boil over about the corruption in the church and indulgences and all of that. And seeing Savonarola, she used a real figure from history to be a part of the story. And he was a real martyr. And it's just so, she picked such a big topic to cover, but she did it. And she did it. This is just an amazing book. I can't stop gushing about it. Then another quote that I thought just really applied to Tito: belongs to every large nature when it is not under the immediate power of some strong, unquestioning emotion to suspect itself and doubt the truth of its own impressions, conscious of possibilities beyond its horizon. I think one of the chapters that moved me the most is chapter 36, Ariadne discrowns herself, and this chapter where Tito has cut Romola to the quick. He could not have hurt her more. He could not have thought of a way, I think, to hurt her more deeply than to sell her father's library and tell her after the fact. That just really got to me. And just this paragraph where it says, Romola, instead of shutting her eyes and ears, had watched the process. The exhaustion consequent on violent emotion is apt to bring a dreamy disbelief in the reality of its cause. And in the evening, when the workmen were gone, Romola took her hand lamp and walked slowly round amongst the confusion of straw and wooden cases, pausing at every vacant pedestal, every well-known object laid prostrate, with a sort of bitter desire to assure herself that there was a sufficient reason why her love was gone and the world was barren for her. And still, as the evenings came, she went and went again, no longer to assure herself, but because this vivifying of pain and despair about her father's memory was the strongest life left to her affections. And just seeing the deep, deep pain she is going through, it moved me to tears. And then later on, when she puts herself into the boat, and she's hoping to die, that was when I really broke down reading it. It just really, it really got to me. And then you see towards the end of the book, this is the chapter 58, A Final Understanding, that Tito still does not see why Romola would be upset about what he did. He says, I believe you have no other grievance against me, except that I have failed in fulfilling some lofty indefinite conditions on which you give me your wifely affection, so that by withdrawing it, you have gradually reduced me to the careful supply of your wants as a fair Piagnone of high condition and liberal charities. I think your success in gibbeting me is not certain. So just that he is the definition of a fool. He is the definition of a fool, and people toss that term around, but a fool is someone who won't be taught, and he is someone who won't be taught. And then lastly, just with the epilogue, I mean, I underlined so much on this page. And I thought there was just a great kind of summary of how the rise and fall of Tito even. She says, she's talking to Lila, one of the children, Romola is, and she says, it is only a poor sort of happiness that could ever come by caring very much about our own narrow pleasures. We can only have the highest happiness, such as goes along with being a great man, by having wide thoughts and much feeling for the rest of the world as well as ourselves. And this sort of happiness often brings so much pain with it that we can only tell it from pain by its being what we would choose before everything else, because our souls see it as good. There are so many things wrong and difficult in the world that no man can be great. He can hardly keep himself from wickedness unless he gives up thinking much about pleasure or rewards and get strength to endure what is hard and painful. And Tito did try to just evade the hard and painful things, and thinking that he could completely evade them, and you can't, unfortunately. Life is just not that simple. Often, the things that we have to work hardest at are the most rewarding. So then I will read the rest of rest of Christy's comment. So she says, my favorite aspect is Eliot's characterization. And I absolutely matchless is how she says. The little moral lesson Romola gave Lilo at the end about Tito's character made me laugh. Hurrah for Victorian moralizing. And it's so funny because, I read that quote, I loved it. And I do hear people often say, and it is so true of Victorian novels, that they're moralizing. But what I say is that's just my aesthetic. Like, I honestly like having the lesson at the end. And I think that modern novels can still have moralizing, but it's what the modern sentiments of our day are. And, let's not fool ourselves that in 100 years, people are going to judge the values that we have by modern standards. And that is how we do this now. We judge Victorian novels by modern standards. And so I think there is still moralizing, but it's done in a very different way. But I do sense that when I read modern novels, but it's a very different kind. And then Christy also says, but Eliot did a fantastic job expressing those concepts through plotting Tito's choices and their results. His choices slowly transformed him from a popular youth of great beauty and potential to a deceitful, adulterous, and morally bankrupt man, all to avoid threatening his own comfort. And I love that. So convicting. I definitely struggle with that love of comfort sometimes. So yes, it really, myself too, just so guilty of that. And then she says the secret keeping kept stressed me out until I read the plot on Wiki. And I know that is a thing in Victorian novels where they just draw out when the secret's going to be revealed. And she says, I wish I had time to dig more into the vivid setting and historical details. I just read an article about Savonarola, and now I feel like I'm better prepared to understand the historical plot. I loved learning about this reformer. Clearly, Eliot, like other Victorian authors, and Savonarola himself, were concerned with corruption in the high places of church and state. I also loved the character and development of Romola. She does embody the values of a saint, no matter what she believed. I wish you could have known Dino better. Oh, that's true. She really doesn't get to know her brother that much. I hadn't thought of that aspect. Regardless, she truly lived for others, and she was one of the happiest characters in the story. Other than Tessa, of course. We see again Eliot's belief that the peasant is often happier than the ambitious or the rich. See, that's why I love people leaving comments, because that's a theme that I didn't think about while I was reading it. And now in times when I reread Eliot, I'm going to be thinking about that. Money, it can keep you fed. It can keep you safe. And it can give you opportunities, but it can't make you happy. And I think so much of the time we just think, if I have more, then I'll be perfectly happy. Overall, a fascinating Renaissance historical drama peopled with believable characters and epic plotting. I'm not sure how I would rate it because I didn't always enjoy it, but I loved parts of it and I loved the points she made. Anyway, I'm glad I read this. Thank you for hosting. I'm so excited that Christy left that comment, and since my video was late, I was able to include her comment. So I agree with Christy that it wasn't a fun read, but I loved certain parts of it and it spoke to me deeply. So it's just a very different experience for reading, a fairy tale retelling or a cozy mystery. I think that's all I have to say because I think this video is going to be over 30 minutes. I'm going to leave it here. Thank you so much, Christy, for your comments. Anybody else who read it and didn't get around to commenting on my announcement video, please leave your comments down below and I will be back for another video soon. Bye.